It starts with an itch and a tingle, and then it builds and expands. And suddenly, all at once, my legs won't let me stand. I scratch till my fingers go numb.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Suicide Sucks. Now, a bit different this episode. It's always been a dream of mine on the podcast to not just interview people that have made attempts on their life, but also to interview support groups and other people, individuals that believe that they've got something to offer that can help. So today in the camper van we have got Suzy. Now Suzy's had various jobs over the years. She's worked for the homeless charity Shelter and for the NHS as an equality and diversity practitioner. However, she's always wanted to train as a counsellor and psychotherapist, and she now is one. So she has her own private practice in Leeds where she sees a wide variety of clients. And she's here today to talk to us about how she can help people with maybe relationship issues, depression, anxiety, bereavement and suicidal ideation. So Suzy, welcome to the camper.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here. I've got my cup of tea, everyone, because I know you want to know. But Suzy's just had a coffee, so she's all right. But she is permanently hand on Ozzy. So Ozzy's with us as well today, just so that you know, he's always with me, my assistant. So Suzy, could you tell us, first of all, because some people might not have any idea what psychotherapy is. We've all heard of counselling, but there's millions of different types of counselling. So tell us what psychotherapy is.
It's a really good question because it's quite a disputed question, shall we say. So there are a lot of people who think that counselling and psychotherapy is the same thing, and it's just a label. But actually psychotherapy tends to be longer term help, so it can support somebody over a long period of time, and I've had people that I've worked with for quite a number of years, to explore not just the current crisis, if you like, but also some of the issues that might be leading to that crisis. So I suppose a good way of putting it is about an exploration of yourself through psychotherapy. And whereas counselling, I would say more is about, I'm feeling really depressed, so I just need somebody to talk to for a short amount of time. But there are some people who would say that they're one and the same thing. But I think there is a slight distinction in terms of the depth of the work, but also very often the length of time of the work.
Right. So is it fair to say then that you look back through somebody's past?
Yeah, well, it kind of, that's where it gets a bit complicated because it depends on the model of therapy that you're using. So some would say that, for example, if you consider yourself to be a psychodynamic psychotherapist, then the main theory, if you like, behind that is looking back at past experiences, childhood influences, those kind of things. Whereas if somebody is a person-centred therapist, they're more likely to be looking at the kind of here and now experiencing of the client. Myself, I am classed as an integrative therapist, so I integrate different theories, and for me the main thrust really of what I do is about building a relationship. So it's relational. It's what we would call an intersubjectivity. So I'm a subject, they're a subject. We meet and form this relationship that helps the client to work out where some of their issues have come from, what some of the influences might have been that have actually got them to where they are today. So that could be childhood experiences, it could be adverse childhood experiences, or it could just be their upbringing, you know, what happened in their upbringing, what the dynamics were like in the family. So I would tend to do a bit of a history with them, first of all. What's their support network like? What was the dynamics within their family growing up? You know, what were they? Did they feel heard? Did they feel supported growing up, and by family or from other kind of significant people in their lives? And so that is the way that I work. But I also work with the here and now experiencing. So how does it feel to be here right now? And I also bring in influences of other counselling models, so Gestalt theory and transactional analysis, which are two that I'm particularly interested in, which bring in different dynamics and different theoretical perspectives.
Right. Okay.
The client wouldn't be aware of that.
No. So this is all kind of going on in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is listening to this and they're thinking, oh, I've not tried that. Should I try that? What would they, I mean, is it always different? I suppose it might always be different, but generally speaking, what would that first session look like?
It is always different, you're right, because I'm generally led by the client, and sometimes the client gets in the room for the first session. They've not spoken to anybody at all about some of the things they might be experiencing, and it's just a big blur. Everything comes out at once. If we have the time, if we have the space, if you like, to slow that down, then I would generally ask them, what their support network's like. What was their family life like growing up? Do they have siblings? Were their parents both parents part of their lives growing up? Was there any tension there? But also about what's happening now. So, do they have a partner or somebody that they can talk to outside of the sessions, or do they have friends or people that they trust that can hear? Of course, it's not always possible, because sometimes it's the loneliness and isolation that have brought them in the first place. So we would look at broader in terms of the support. What I don't want is a client to come in, have one session with me, go home, having brought all this stuff up and haven't know where to go with that. So I'm kind of interested in how they're going to support themselves between sessions as well.
And so is it a case of the psychotherapy can help somebody to understand why they might have issues in their now life, and looking at what could have been the cause for that? It part of the cause, I think I would say, because it's normally quite a lot of different factors. But it's really gratifying when a client comes back the following week after we've had a bit of a breakthrough, and they've said, actually, I really understand now why I think whatever, because that really relates to whatever happened in the childhood or what they felt in the childhood. And sometimes they have the realisation that how they felt about something that's happened in the childhood is not helpful to them anymore, and that life has moved on, but they're still holding on to this fear or discomfort or whatever. It just and so they can say, actually, now I can move on from that, because now I know that isn't part of my here and now experiencing. That's archaic, and I can leave it where it was. They're almost still seeing it through young eyes, and feeling it through young eyes,
and that's really where transactional analysis is really useful, because that looks at different aspects of self in terms of what we call ego states. So they can work out whether what they're feeling is coming from a child place or if it's from an adult place. And I mean, it's way more complex than that, obviously, but
I'm sure,
but simply that is quite helpful. And even if you look at Freud, there's nothing new in. Somebody's going to complain about that, I'm sure. But psychotherapy is all based around the same ideas. It's just about how different writers and theorists over the years have interpreted those ideas. So all those things kind of come in together. And I mean, when I'm teaching, we start off with a bit of basic Freud, because obviously he's classed as the founder of modern psychotherapy. And all the way through, then I teach them about different models of counselling and psychotherapy.
Just for our listeners, I forgot to mention that you also teach.
Yes.
Where do you teach?
I'm a senior lecturer at Edge Hill University in Ormskirk.
That's it. And surprisingly, even though we're in South Yorkshire, I went to Edge Hill myself as a university student many years ago. I didn't do psychotherapy or counselling.
I don't think it was offered in those days. No offence, Big.
But so you teach as well.
Yeah. So, you know, when I'm teaching, I'm trying to help the students to make those links between the different theoretical approaches, because that's kind of how I work. And students will often say, so when you're sitting in the room with a client, are you thinking, oh, I need to be more psychodynamic, I need to be more person-centred? And the answer is no. I just go with what comes up. And as I say, for me, it's all about the relationship with the client and helping them to feel heard, helping them to feel important, really, I suppose, which they may not have had, or they may not have had about a particular issue.
I feel like it's something we should all have.
Absolutely. I'm a great advocate for that. And as a therapist, I've had a lot of therapy over the years. You have to as part of your training, but even before then. So I do think it's really important and valuable.
Definitely. So people can come to you, as I mentioned it just at the beginning of the podcast, for various reasons. Obviously, because this is Suicide Sucks, I'm kind of interested mostly in, you know, the mental health things of depression and suicidal ideation. Is there anything that you can, obviously you can't talk about any clients you've had, but is there anything that you can tell us that would potentially encourage somebody to seek out psychotherapy because it could help?
Yeah, there's a few things actually. I think one of the most important things is lack of judgment. So I think sometimes people get caught in a bit of a spiral of not being able to talk about how they're feeling because somebody's going to judge that. Whether that's judging, you know, somebody's feeling suicidal and talks about it to somebody who is a friend or a family member, they may feel that they're going to be judged. They may feel that they're going to be watched all the time. Whereas for me, as a therapist, if somebody comes to me and talks to me about how they're feeling and how suicidal they might be feeling, I hear them, I listen to them, I don't make any judgment, and the last thing I do is say, don't do that, because that is taking away their own autonomy. And I'm a great believer, and this is probably controversial for the podcast, but I'm a great believer in trusting people to trust themselves. And if things are so bad that somebody really wants to end their own life, they're going to do it whether you tell them not to or not. And for me, it's about hearing what they have to say and help and encouraging them to reframe some of their thoughts about what might be going on for them. So for me, it's about listening. It's about hearing, not just pretending to listen, but really hearing what's going on and helping them to feel hopefully less isolated, less alone in all of this.
And like you say, without the judgment and the shame and guilt that comes with those feelings when people have them, I think. So yeah, that's really, really important.
I think family and friends are very often are likely to say, don't do it, what can we do to stop you? Whereas as a therapist, I would say, I don't know exactly what I would say, it depends on the situation, but I would say, you know, why do you feel like that? What's going on for you that's brought you to this point? And not say stop, because I don't think that's helpful. I think it's more helpful for them to explore why they feel like that, because there's more longevity in that anyway. If you understand your feelings, there's more chance that you're going to rethink things and maybe make a different choice and not feel so alone.
Yeah, so it's not about preventing something from happening. It's about almost retraining the way your brain thinks about that topic.
Yeah, I'm a great believer that everybody has their own autonomy, and that's part of the ethical framework for counsellors and psychotherapists from the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. The clients have their own autonomy, as do I, and telling somebody what they're feeling is wrong takes away their autonomy.
Yeah. So, with the psychotherapy, obviously one thing that we hear a lot is the cost of things, and there is help out there, and there's something different for each person that might work, but for some people it's just unattainable because you can't even try it out because things are so expensive. And I mean, obviously everybody's got to charge for things. It's not,
got to make
rocket
a living.
Science. Yeah. So, I mean, are there ways that people can access psychotherapy without it costing an arm and a leg?
There are. I mean, when I was training and just after I finished my training, I did a lot of work as a volunteer, and I was qualified, so it wasn't like I was, out of control. And there are organisations that provide therapy for free, but very often it's very short term, very limited. So it's more counselling really, it's more kind of focused. But also it tends to be for a specific client group. So I worked with asylum seekers and refugees for Solace in Leeds as a counsellor, as a volunteer counsellor, where a number of my clients were suicidal because of what they'd been through in terms of things like torture, discrimination, come to the UK as an asylum seeker and then being just dumped with nothing. And they got free counselling. And there are other organisations, but even places like Mind will ask for a small charge, but it does tend to be a lot cheaper than going privately. The problem with that is they're all oversubscribed. The waiting lists are horrendous. And some counsellors do offer reduced rates. I myself, if somebody is on benefits or whatever, or a student, I do offer a reduced rate, but it's still expensive. And I'm quite cheap. I see a lot of people that I've taught who are charging like a lot more than I am, and I think, okay, well, I'm actually okay with charging what I charge because I want to make it as accessible as possible. But I still have to live.
Yeah, and I always feel like with things like this that it's, like with me myself, I'm happy to pay for things if I know that it's going to work and I'm going to get the benefits. So. It's almost like you need a try before you buy type of thing. Is there that?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't offer a free session. Some therapists do. I do offer a free, 20-minute phone call. But I've had clients in the past, not so much these days because most of my clients are word of mouth. So I get lots of people who come and say, a friend of mine came to see you and spoke very highly of you. So, I want some of that for myself. So it happens less now. But sometimes people come and I'm just not the right fit for them. And that's absolutely fine because, we're not the right fit for everybody. And they'll come once and then they won't come back. And that happens. And so people do get a choice. But, I can't give away free sessions because it's not sustainable. I have to pay my rent and my tax and all of that stuff.
No, of course not. So The psychotherapy. So, are you a counsellor as well as?
Well, it's all.
It's just
yeah.
all
My
becomes...
qualification is a MA in psychotherapy and counselling.
Right. Okay.
From the University of Leeds.
Okay. And so, just to recap, it generally is. It's led by the person that comes to see you.
Yeah.
And it's talking really to try and work out potentially if there are any things within your life that are partly responsible for how you might be feeling in the present day.
I also, it's not just about talking with my sessions. So I do sometimes incorporate some kind of mindfulness exercise, some trying to soothe the I can't say that word, autonomic nervous system, by doing breathing or whatever. I also, part of what I teach at Edge Hill is around creative approaches to psychotherapy. So I have a box full of toys and art materials and things in my room. So sometimes it's about helping people to express themselves in ways other than talking if they're finding it difficult to talk. So I have the standard things like fluffy toys, fidget toys, Russian dolls. Russian dolls are a classic for therapists. But I also have pens, paints. I don't have paints actually because it's too messy. Pens, crayons, anything and things like ribbons and stones and all sorts of things that you can use.
That is interesting because obviously, a lot of people don't want to talk.
Exactly.
So you've got to get around that.
Yeah.
And what about children? Do you see children?
I don't. My training doesn't cover that. And to be honest, there are plenty of specialists who work with children out there. I work with people no younger than 16.
Right.
Because there's a lot of issues around consent and including the parents and that kind of thing, which I'm not that happy about. I think clients need to have that autonomy. And if you've got somebody who is... I know I supervise somebody who works in a school and has young people, and it can get quite messy in terms of keeping the parents in the loop. And sometimes I think that inhibits the client from talking if they think that the parents are going to find out about it. So yeah, I've never trained in working with children. And on Edge Hill, we don't train people to work with children. If they want to do something working with children and young people, then they can do some additional training. And I could if I wanted to, but I work with couples as well. And I'm just in the middle of doing a course on trauma-informed counselling and psychotherapy, a lot of which I already knew, but it's about putting it in one place to kind of understand that.
Yeah, because a lot of people I speak to who have had suicidal thoughts or even made attempts on their life, see PTSD always, well not always, but often comes up. And that, experiencing lots of different traumas, not just the one.
And there is a real difference actually between that kind of, what do they call it? I can't believe I've just been learning about this. There's like the shock episode, and that can often lead to PTSD. But there's also the kind of long-term trauma that is things like child abuse, neglect, things that have gone on for a long time that are trauma, but a different kind of trauma to, say, being in a car accident or something like that. And it's really important to work accordingly. So not just dismiss the car accident if there have been other things previously going on, because that all impacts on the trauma.
Yeah, and sometimes for people, you can assume that it's one thing, but there might actually be other things. Do you ever come across that kind of like a light bulb moment for somebody where they think, oh? Absolutely,
all the time. And one of my first ever clients when I was training, you have to do so many hours
Yes.
placement before you're allowed it out with the public. Well, no, it was with the public, but I did one of my placements at Cruise Bereavement Care, and I had a client who, at that time, Cruise had no limit to how long you could work with somebody, and I had a client who came for bereavement support because her father had died, and I worked with her for quite a long time. I want to say about 2 years, but so much came up that was not really to do with I think if anybody had been listening from Cruise, they would have had something to say about me, but for me it was brilliant because the work was so powerful for her and for me, because she was exploring all sorts of different things. Lots of things about family relationships came up, but it was very often it's like we've come with this thing, but actually it's something else, and that happens all the time. Sometimes it's the thing that there's a thing that gets them through the door, and that isn't necessarily the thing that they want to work on, but they feel that they've had to have something that gets them through the door, and that can be the breakdown of a relationship. It can be all sorts of things, some work issue that's going on, and that's the thing that gives them okay, so I need some help now. But actually what comes out is a lot more than that.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like being diagnosed with a medical condition, isn't it? It's like once you have actually honed in on, that's why I'm feeling like this. It can all of a sudden seem brighter, can't it? You at least know what you're dealing with and how to process it.
Something that's really interesting is I'm trained as a coach as well. Excuse me.
Basketball coach.
No. No. I was trained as a performance coach for work when I worked for the NHS, and this was just immediately before I started my counselling training, or it might have been around the same time, I can't remember. But I used to advertise my services for coaching and counselling. I don't really anymore. I occasionally use a bit of coaching in the work. And very often people would come to say that they wanted coaching because somehow, we're going back 15 years when I first started out in private practice. It felt easier for them to come in and say, I want coaching with a work issue, than to say what was really going on.
Right.
So it was like, okay, you're coming for coaching, but I know this isn't really going to work.
Yeah. That's that again, the fact that one thing gets you in the door, but it can be completely different things. Yeah.
Oh, the only other thing I wanted to talk about briefly is kind of relates a little bit to my PhD research, which was about language. But what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this before I came this morning was one of my participants in my research has written a book about working with suicidal clients, and because my research was about language, we talked a lot about the sorts of language people use around suicide. And I think one of the things, and I think this is probably really pertinent to the podcast, one of the things that I feel is important is naming it and being very clear with the language and not using euphemisms, not kind of. So if a client comes to me and talks about suicide, I will name it. I will use the language that they're using. And even if they're using language that's a bit kind of round the houses, I will try and name it and make sure that they're okay with the name that I've given. But just having that. So I do think language is really important in the therapy session when talking about things like that. So I just wanted to add that in because it just felt really important.
Well, it's a perfect place to end, isn't it, for the end of the episode of Suicide Sucks. So, Suzy, thank you so much for joining me in the campervan.
You're very welcome.
It starts with an itch and a tingle, and then it builds and expands. And suddenly, all at once, my legs won't let me stand. I scratch till my fingers go numb.